Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're reflections of real emotions, real mistakes, and real moments that quietly change lives. If you've ever felt lost in silence, stayed loyal while feeling invisible, or wondered how close someone can come to crossing a line without realizing it, this story is for you. Now, let me tell you about Daniel Harris. Daniel Harris had always believed that life announced its biggest changes loudly. He believed in slammed doors, raised voices, dramatic confessions, moments that arrived with warning signs you couldn't ignore. In his mind, life shifted during arguments, during ultimatums, during clear endings. He never imagined that everything could begin unraveling on a quiet evening, the kind that looked exactly like every other evening before it. That night, the house felt unnaturally still. Not peaceful, not calm, just empty. The air carried the faint smell of dinner that had gone cold hours earlier. Something reheated and untouched, forgotten the way habits sometimes are. The overhead kitchen light hummed softly, a sound Daniel had never noticed before but suddenly couldn't ignore. He stood near the kitchen counter, phone in hand, scrolling endlessly without absorbing a single word on the screen. News headlines, emails, messages he didn't reply to. His thumb moved out of muscle memory, not intention. From the hallway, he could hear Laura moving slowly. The quiet shuffle of someone preparing for bed alone, even when they weren't. No words passed between them. Not because they were angry. Not because they were fighting. Silence had simply become easier than trying. Daniel and Laura Harris hadn't started this way. They had met years earlier in college, in Michigan. Two young people full of plans, energy, and certainty. Daniel remembered the first time he saw her, sitting cross-legged on the library floor, surrounded by textbooks, her hair pulled into a messy bun as she laughed at something he'd said. Back then, conversation came effortlessly. They talked about everything: future careers, cities they wanted to live in, children's names they pretended not to take seriously. They stayed up late dreaming, believing love was something that sustained itself if you wanted it badly enough. They married soon after graduation. Life happened the way it does. Jobs dictated where they moved, responsibilities replaced spontaneity, and routines quietly took the place of passion. But for a long time, they were happy in the way people expect happiness to look. Comfortable, stable, predictable. Somewhere along the way, though, something faded. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It happened slowly, like color washing out of an old photograph until you don't realize how dull it's become until you see it beside a newer one. Laura worked long hours at a healthcare office. Emotionally demanding work. Exhausting schedules. Daniel worked in marketing, a world of deadlines, presentations, and constant pressure to perform. Their schedules rarely aligned. When they did sit together, conversations revolved around bills, groceries, repairs, and responsibilities. Necessary things. Safe things. They stopped talking about feelings because those conversations felt heavy, complicated, and neither of them knew where to begin anymore. Daniel told himself this was normal. Everyone he knew said marriage changed with time. That passion softened. That quiet meant stability. Still, there were nights when the silence felt too loud. At work, Daniel was known as reliable, calm, structured. He liked plans. He liked order. He believed deeply in doing the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. Especially when it wasn't easy. That was why he noticed Emily Carter almost immediately. Not because she demanded attention, but because she didn't. Emily had joined the company 6 months earlier, transferring from Toronto after a painful breakup she never spoke about directly. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need validation. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, people leaned in. Daniel first spoke to her during a project review meeting. They were assigned together to fix a failing deadline. Nothing personal, nothing intentional. At first, their conversations stayed professional. Numbers, strategy, ideas. But over time, small personal details slipped through the cracks. Where they grew up, why they chose their careers, what they missed about home. Emily spoke about Canada with warmth, her family, cold winters, familiar streets. Daniel talked about college days and dreams he hadn't revisited in years. Something about those conversations felt lighter. They began taking coffee breaks at the same time. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they sat in silence that didn't feel awkward. Emily had a way of asking simple questions that opened doors Daniel didn't know were still there. She never pushed. She just listened. Daniel didn't recognize the danger at first. He told himself friendship was harmless. That connection didn't always mean intention. That he was still a good man. But something inside him began to shift. He started noticing the clock more often. Waiting for workdays to begin instead of end. He noticed when Emily wasn't around. At home the silence deepened. Laura wasn't cold. She wasn't cruel. She was tired. Stress lived in her shoulders. Worry rested permanently behind her eyes. Daniel wanted to reach her, but every attempt felt clumsy. When he asked if something was wrong, she said she was exhausted. When he suggested spending time together, she said, maybe later. Later rarely came. One evening, Daniel stayed late at the office to finish a presentation. The building emptied slowly until only soft lights and the quiet hum of air vents remained. Emily was still there, typing at her desk. They exchanged tired smiles. You should go home, she said gently. So should you, Daniel replied. She laughed quietly. They talked while packing up. Not about work but pressure. Feeling stuck. Regret. Emily admitted she sometimes wondered if starting over had been the right decision. Without planning to, Daniel admitted something he had never said out loud. Sometimes, he said, I feel like a stranger in my own life. The words surprised even him. Emily didn't react with shock. She nodded. That simple understanding hit Daniel harder than anything else could have. For the first time in a long time he felt seen. The drive home that evening felt heavier than any Daniel could remember. The city lights blurred through his windshield, stretching into long streaks of white and red. His hands rested firmly on the steering wheel, but his thoughts were anything but steady. Emily's reaction replayed again and again in his mind. Not her words, but her understanding. That was what unsettled him most. She hadn't tried to fix him. She hadn't judged him. She hadn't minimized what he felt. She had simply listened. At home, the house greeted him the same way it always did. Quiet, dim, unchanged. Laura had already gone to bed. Daniel moved carefully, as if sound itself might expose something he didn't yet have words for. He lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths that wouldn't slow. Guilt crept in slowly, not sharp or accusatory but persistent. Like a voice that wouldn't stop whispering. Nothing had happened, he told himself. And yet, something had. Over the next several days, the connection between Daniel and Emily continued to grow. Not openly, not recklessly, but undeniably. There were no stolen touches, no secret messages late at night. Just awareness. An understanding that something unspoken existed between them. Sitting quietly like an open book neither dared to read, Daniel began noticing small things. The way Emily's presence shifted his mood. The way her absence felt heavier than it should. The way he looked forward to work more than coming home. At home, Laura moved through the days on autopilot. She wasn't unkind. She wasn't distant on purpose. She was exhausted, emotionally and physically. Her job drained her compassion during the day, leaving little left for the evenings. Daniel watched her shoulders slump as she kicked off her shoes, watched her stare blankly at the television without seeing it. He wanted to reach her, but every attempt felt awkward. When he asked if something was wrong, she brushed it off. When he suggested doing something together, she postponed it. Later became a habit. Distance became routine. Then came the storm. The meeting had run late that evening. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the windows. Rain slammed against the glass, heavy and relentless. Most employees rushed out early, eager to avoid the weather. Daniel noticed Emily standing near the front desk, staring down at her phone. Her brow creased in frustration. "Everything okay?" he asked. She looked up. "My car won't start. I think the battery's dead." He didn't hesitate. "I can drive you," he said. It felt like the natural thing to do. He didn't call Laura. He didn't pause to consider how it might look. He didn't question the decision at all. He simply grabbed his keys. The rain turned the streets into mirrors, reflecting streetlights in broken patterns. Inside the car, the sound of water filled the silence between them. At first, they talked quietly, about the storm, about work, about nothing important. Then the conversation faded. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt full. When they reached Emily's apartment building, neither of them moved right away. Emily sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. Daniel waited, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. "This year has been harder than I expected," Emily said finally. Daniel turned toward her. In the dim light, he saw exhaustion etched into her expression, the kind that came from carrying everything alone. "Me too," he admitted. The truth hung between them. Emily looked at him then, really looked at him. "When I talk to you," she said softly, "I feel like myself again." Daniel's heart began to race. He knew that feeling. He had been afraid to name it. He should have stepped back, changed the subject, reminded them both of boundaries, promises, responsibility. Instead, he stayed still, caught between what was right and what felt real. They didn't touch. They didn't say anything more. But in that pause, something shifted. The moment stretched, heavy with meaning neither of them could deny. Finally, Emily opened the door. "Thank you for the ride," she said. Daniel nodded. "Anytime." He watched her disappear into the building, then drove away with shaking hands. At home, Laura was already asleep. Daniel lay awake beside her, his thoughts racing. Guilt pressed in from all sides. Confusion followed close behind. But beneath it all was something that scared him most of all. Hope. He realized that night something important and dangerous. The heart doesn't always need action to cross a line. Sometimes, it only needs permission. And without meaning to, Daniel had given his heart exactly that. Daniel woke before sunrise. The room was dim, quiet. Yet his thoughts were loud and relentless. He lay beside Laura, listening to her steady breathing. She looked peaceful, unaware of the storm growing inside him. Guilt settled heavily in his chest. Nothing physical had happened. And yet, it felt as though something irreversible had. He slipped out of bed quietly and made his way to the kitchen. The coffee machine hummed as dawn crept through the window. Daniel stared at his reflection in the glass, barely recognizing the man looking back. He had always believed he was honest, loyal, dependable. Now those words felt uncertain. At work, the office buzzed with its usual rhythm. Emails, meetings, casual conversations. Daniel tried to focus, but his attention drifted constantly. When he finally saw Emily across the room, his chest tightened. She looked calm, but distant. She nodded politely, nothing more. The warmth they once shared was guarded now, wrapped carefully behind professionalism. They avoided each other most of the morning. When they did speak, it was brief and work-related. Daniel felt the change like a bruise he couldn't stop pressing. He wanted to talk, to explain, to apologize, but he didn't even know what he would say. At lunch, Daniel sat alone at his desk, replaying the night again and again, searching for the moment he could have chosen differently. He knew the truth. Part of him hadn't wanted to stop. Emily spent her lunch break walking along the river near the office. The wind cut sharply across the water, cold and unforgiving. She felt torn, caught between relief and regret. She had sensed the danger. She had known the risk. And yet, her heart had leaned forward anyway. She didn't want to become part of a story that ended in pain. That afternoon, Daniel received a short message. "We need to talk. Not here. Somewhere quiet." His hands trembled as he read it. He replied with a simple yes. They met after work at a small park outside the city. A place meant for reflection, not noise. The trees were bare. The sky was gray and heavy. They walked in silence before stopping near a bench. "I can't pretend nothing happened," Emily said. Daniel nodded. "Neither can I." She met his gaze. "I won't be someone's escape. And I won't live in confusion." Her words were calm, but firm. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Daniel said. "Especially my wife." "Then you need to be honest with yourself first," she replied. They stood there facing a truth neither could ignore. Emily told him she needed space. Time to protect her own heart. Daniel agreed, though the emptiness it left behind felt unbearable. That night, Daniel went home early. Laura was sitting on the couch reading. She looked up, surprised. "You're home early," she said. "Yeah," Daniel replied. "I thought we could talk." They sat together, the space between them heavy with unspoken things. He didn't confess. Not yet. Instead, he asked how she was really feeling. Laura hesitated, then sighed. "I feel like we're roommates," she said quietly. "I miss us." The honesty cut deep. For the first time, Daniel realized she had been hurting too, just silently.